3 months ago, I released my Xperia 5 II review, having owned it for 2 weeks at that point. I stated in that video that I was planning to do a long-term update, since I know that the more you daily drive a device, the more quirks and annoyances you can find with it. And that's what I'm doing with this video. At its best, the Xperia 5 II is an incredible device that is a joy to own, but at its worst, the phone annoys me so much that I want to throw it out the window in a fit of rage. So in today's video, let's revisit the Xperia 5 II and give you guys my definitive opinions on this phone. Firstly, the notification LED is broken software-wise and does tend to pulse even after you've opened or dismissed a notification. I found the LED's usefulness limited in my 3 months of ownership, firstly because of the ambient display lighting up when you get a message, secondly because I bought a smartwatch, and thirdly because the light blinks so infrequently it's useless to gauge at a quick glance if you received a message or not. Secondly, I spoke a bit about the headphone jack in the original review, however I want to talk about it a bit more. There's definitely more clarity compared to listening on Bluetooth, even via aptX HD. However, despite the phone having a high-res DAC unlockable with a third-party app, the sound isn't anything special. That doesn't mean the sound is bad, because it's not. It's good. Just don't expect this phone to sound anything like the LG V series or a Fio or something. Compared to my Moto X style, the Xperia is bassier and has less mids, and the X style has more mids and highs, which makes sound cleaner but tinier. Frankly, sound is so subjective, whichever one you prefer just comes down to preference. However, you may find yourself having to use the jack as opposed to Bluetooth because the signal strength is awful. No matter the codec of a device, the audio keeps dropping, even when my phone has a line of sight with the speaker. Like every 3 minutes it goes blip, 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 and then return back to the song. And now it's fine again. I don't get it. Nothing's changed, but Bluetooth has went from okay to terrible back to okay again. I don't really understand why. Since this video clip, it's returned mostly to normal, but I don't know if that's because Sony fixed it or if it is because it sometimes happens and sometimes it doesn't. The fingerprint scanner is still hit and miss. I realised that it works perfectly well with my right hand, but not my left. So when it's in my left hand, my dominant hand, I just have to unlock it via the pattern or via my smartwatch. This made the fingerprint scanner even more useless than Face ID. At least Face ID works as long as you don't have a mask. The fingerprint scanner won't work unless your phone is in your right hand. The brightness of the screen is fine, but it's not ideal. I found the display too dim when using the phone for photography or for say watching videos when I'm out in a bright environment. However, for reading text it's perfectly fine, even in sunny situations. There's also an extra boost that you get when you're in a bright situation, which a lot of other Android phones do have. I quickly touched on the performance issue as I thought a software update fixed it. It didn't. The new software update, every time, has had my phone running fine for a week or so, and then it slows down again. It's my biggest annoyance with this phone. Sometimes it takes 2 days, sometimes it takes 3, sometimes maybe even 4. But either way, this phone slows down to a crawl, where the frame rate drops and apps take forever to load. It goes to the soft speeds my Moto X style from 2015 experiences. This phone has had plenty of updates, but Sony seems to have not addressed this issue. And it's really a shame because having to do a restart constantly sucks, especially when you're in the middle of doing something. I didn't speak about this in the original video, but there is no wireless charging on board. I did not speak about the bokeh mode in the last video, but it works alright when it wants to. I like how in Google Photos you can change the intensity of the blur. I do wish Sony would add more camera features like Samsung has. Like, a time-lapse function or even hyperlapse function. I spoke about the scene optimizer and I just want to add that it works great on food. It saturates the food, but just the food, so it doesn't make your whole picture just overly saturated. It just makes the food look nicer. There's a new camera app that I installed based off the one from the Mac 3. I am not sure if Sony will include this camera app for the Mac 2 phones, but either way, this app merges Photo Pro and the regular camera app into one app. I spoke in my last video about how the video quality changes depending on which lens is being used, but I didn't go into detail because I didn't know exactly what was going on. As it turns out, on the old camera app, you had the option to change video quality settings per lens. So for example, you could have telephoto being 4K and ultrawide being 1080p 60. The new camera app removes this, which is good because the old one was confusing, but at the same time I actually do miss this because digital zoom on this phone just completely sucks when using video. I found myself not using Cinema Pro as much as I thought I would use it because of the lack of an auto ISO, and when in a dim environment, even setting it to ISO 800 and 1/30th shutter speed, the footage would be still too dark, while in the normal camera app it would be perfectly fine. Furthermore, as Michael Fisher stated in his Xperia 1 Mark III review, Cinema Pro overexposes footage. This problem has 2 parts. First of all, on the viewfinder, the footage may look better, being, say, almost a stop, if not a stop, overexposed than if it was perfectly exposed. The second problem is that the phone doesn't seem to support its own footage correctly. Have a look at this comparison with my iPhone. The iPhone seems overexposed on video, but in real life, it looks fantastic. The bright sections are very bright and the dark sections are flat. The Sony in comparison is just completely flat through and through. Considering it's recording in HDR, I would expect it to play back in HDR, but that's evidently what it's not doing. The footage looks the same as if I was looking at it, for example, on my laptop. This makes exposing difficult, because on the viewfinder, the footage will look differently on the Sony than if it was on your TV. With over 108 hours usage clocked on AccuBattery, I can tell you guys that the screen on time at its best is 7.5 hours, so the battery life is very good. I would like to address the mini controversy that has been started with the Xperia 1 Mark III reviews. Mainly I want to talk about Michael Fisher's review. Firstly, as this video proves, Xperia phones aren't the type of phones you can just talk a lot about after the first week. You really need to get to know them to learn their quirks and features, as Doug DeMuro would say. I mean, I've had this script for like a week, 2 weeks maybe, and I'm still adding things onto it. Just because I am still learning things about the Xperia over 3 months later. Michael's a very respectable guy, and he knows when he's in the wrong. He's talked about him being in the wrong on Twitter. But at best, leaving snacky comments, and at worst, leaving personal comments towards the reviewer is not the way to go. Don't write hate comments because someone didn't like a device that you like. I personally think a lot of what he said is right, especially his conclusion, which I will focus on now.
But its value is inextricably intertwined with its camera. A camera so dependent on being in professional hands to shine that, well, it's just tough to recommend to anyone except the type of professional photographers who'd be better off shooting with the mirrorless cameras they've probably already got in their bag anyway.
I am that photographer Michael's talking about, not literally, but I bought the Xperia because I want to have a very good camera in my pocket, so I could have photos good enough for my portfolio without having to carry around my camera in my bag. But photography isn't my entire life. I also need a quick and dependable camera in my pocket too, and a dependable phone by extension. And to an extent, the Xperia managed to do this. I have gotten a lot of photos with the Xperia that I like, and I will still defend the camera as being better than a lot of reviewers say it is. But there are times when the phone is just more infuriating to use than a dedicated camera, like when the phone gets the focus wrong, gets the exposure wrong, gets ISO wrong. I don't want to have to stand there and keep just faffing about changing settings to get the photo that I want. I don't have to do that with my own dedicated camera, and if I do, I have a physical slider that I can just blip, and then I do exposure compensation. Better when you have physical controls. And it's even better when the camera gets it right the first time, and well, Sony doesn't do both. And sometimes, even then, when you take a picture, you then still have to go into Lightroom to fix it. And I was perfectly happy with this at first, because, well, that's what I do with my main camera anyway. But you actually find that this process gets very old very quickly. I have thrown away, I am not kidding, over a month and a half worth of photos from the Xperia because I was like, I am not editing them, and they don't look great out of the box. That's why you kind of need a camera that gets it right out of the box. And sometimes the Sony does. Sometimes it really doesn't. I think the general consensus is that Photo Pro takes better photos than the stock camera app, but I don't think that's true at all. I prefer the stock camera footage, and there becomes a problem because if I want to shoot in RAW, I have to use the Photo Pro processing, which I don't think is as good. Like, take a look at this example I shot like an hour ago. So if I was to have that picture, I'll then have to go into Lightroom and turn on the highlights, which is a pain. And I know that Photo Pro does have an HDR mode, but it doesn't work in auto. So every time you have to switch to program mode to use it, or manual, whichever mode you want to use, but you can't use it in auto. I don't know. This script just isn't doing it justice, but it's just quite infuriating to take pictures with the Xperia sometimes. You can get great results with it, believe me, but there are just times where it doesn't do it right. And when it doesn't do it right, it's really annoying. And that is just the general feeling of this entire phone. There are things about it that are great, but when it goes wrong, it goes catastrophically wrong. And that does translate to taking photos. But can the Xperia community please refrain from acting like reviewers are dumb for not working around Sony's quirks? Because frankly, that's just ridiculous. Use Photo Pro instead of the basic camera app for better quality. Use Cinema Pro if you want to tap to focus while recording video. As we know from my main review, this phone isn't for the average user. But if you have to go through hoops to get something to work, or just to get the best out of the phone, that's frankly ridiculous in my opinion, and there's no excuse for Sony's shoddy software suite. Both camera apps should process the same, all camera apps should have tapped focus in photo and video, all camera apps should look good, and all camera apps should be able to record the same resolution and the same frame rate. As I've just spoken about, there is no tap to focus in the new camera app, except there is, you have to go to the settings and then enable it, because by default it's set to tracking for some reason. Also, you can't switch cameras when you record video, unlike on an iPhone, and presumably Android phones too, like other than the Xperia, obviously. Last thing before the conclusion, the proximity sensor is very awkward, I find. I have to position my phone in the exact spot, and if I move it slightly, then the screen wakes up, which is annoying when I'm doing voice notes on Telegram or WhatsApp or whatever. My overall opinion on this phone is mixed. Like the title said, this phone was perfect for me. OLED, beautiful colours, good cameras with RAW support. But the performance crippling with Android 11 is just downright infuriating. Social media apps can't take full advantage of the main camera, processing can't compete against Apple or Google, Bluetooth is broken, the phone is set to receive its final Android version soon, and there are little bugs scattered throughout the entire rest I haven't spoken about. Unfortunately, I recorded and screenshot a lot of these and I whacked my phone, so I don't have a lot of them to show you, but believe me, they are everywhere and they are so irritating. In the main review, I said whether this phone is good for you or not depends on what kind of a person you are, and I still agree with that. However, I additionally think that if you're interested in this phone, it's just worth waiting for the 5.3, as it will probably take until Android 12 for Sony to fix the bugs that they introduced in Android 11, or they could screw things up even more. Sony does not have a good track record when it comes to Android. I have an Android TV from Sony. It's been left for many years on a broken build of Android. And I cannot recommend a phone based on its future, and currently the 5.2, as awesome as it can be, has too many faults. Frankly enough, I don't feel comfortable in recommending the phone at all because of its flaws, even though the device could be so cool without them. It's not a device for pros, because a pro needs a dependable device that does things the first time and that they can easily adapt to, and the Xperia is just far too quirky. It more so exists for the tech enthusiast, rather than a pro in its current state, until Sony fixes all the problems I've spoken about. As for me, I made a decision to go back to the iPhone, the 12 Pro specifically, because this has most of the feature set that the Xperia has, like for example the triple lens camera setup and a good OLED screen and good speakers, but it's dependable. I don't expect apps to freeze on me, apps to crash, the phone to slow down after 2 days, because I know that's not what an iPhone is, that's not how they work. Don't get me wrong, it's not 100% dependable as a phone. I've already taken some photos with it. I was like, Jesus, really, Apple? That's your picture processing? But at least with this phone, there is a RAW button. You don't have to open a separate camera app, and it works great. So it really is an upgrade for me to get the iPhone, even though it doesn't have some other things that the Xperia has, like the 120Hz screen. And I was going to wait for the iPhone 13 Pro, but I really can't with this phone anymore. Okay, just to clarify, what I like with the iPhone is it will take a good picture like 90% of the time, and when it doesn't, all you have to do is tap the RAW button on the top right and then take the picture again and then edit it in your own time. So on this all kind of underwhelming and very negative tone, I must thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.